Hi everyone, and thanks for joining. So today we have Deirdre Porter-Hanson, another lady from the prison residencies. Hi Deirdre.
Hello.
Great having you. So what we'll do today is we get straight into it, and we'll just have a little chat about your work. So if you could just give us a little overview of your arts practice.
So in recent years, I've been working a lot with textiles, and I'm very interested in the sort of narrative that materials hold, whether it's actually previous to that glass or lead, or and now I've been working a lot with the materials that you might associate with women's crafts, so stitching, women's work with lace and embroidery and that sort of thing. So and I've used it to really think about the value that we put on women's work, and the relevance of the sort of secret, quiet work that women do behind the scenes, that is very meticulous and skillful, but for the most part quite ignored and even denigrated. So trying to be more celebratory about some traditional crafts and skills. So yeah.
And have you always worked within textiles?
No, absolutely not. It's quite recent. I've always worked with materials. I sometimes think of myself as a painter, okay. But I do paint, but most of my work in recent years has perhaps used paint as a sort of as a sort of material, like a collage material, rather than it being just a sort of surface colour, if you like. So that, and I've done a lot of collage work, working with different materials, especially found materials. So yeah, because I like the sort of the history that they hold, the stories that materials hold. So working specifically with cloth and fabrics is a relatively recent thing, but it's come out of that sort of exploring the narrative of materials. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you're interested in like women's work and women's textiles. What sparked that on for you?
I have, in recent years, I just talk about journeying with old parents at the end of their lives, basically. Right. Yeah. And so I have inherited recently an awful lot of beautiful bits of cloth, hand stitched pieces of embroidery, and so on and so on. And some of it I could tell you who's made it, and some of it is just gathered, and it's triggered thoughts about things like how sort of wasteful we are nowadays, that we dispose of a lot of things, that we're very casual with. We don't really treasure and value handmade anymore. We're much more interested in quick, immediate things, and so it brings up all sorts of kinds of thoughts about sustainability and make do and mend, and lots of things that are actually coming back into our ways of thinking. So I'm quite intrigued by all of that. Yeah.
There's definitely a clear connection between all those different things, isn't there, and women's work generally. Yeah. So how did you develop those ideas specifically for the prison residencies?
So I had thought there were several things, several different themes that came up in my mind. One of the first ones was the awful thought that when people were hung at Shepton Mallet Prison, the final indignation was that they wouldn't be given a coffin. Yeah. They'd have their mattress, with their straw pulled out of their mattress, and their mattress would become their final resting place, kind of thing. So I had that image in my head of these sort of cloth bags holding people, and so that was quite a vivid image that stuck with me all the way through. And it sort of the main thoughts were about being in prison, life being on hold, life being suspended, and the notion of somebody having their freedoms completely dictated by the authorities. And so I made these pieces which were hangings, and with cloth, and with the idea that it referenced the whole idea of people being in prison and being made totally, all their powers taken away from them. They're just being held at somebody else's pleasure. Yeah. And certain of the pieces that I made also brought to mind women in labour, and the fact that even today women are shackled when they're in labour, and the whole notion of being tied up. Yeah, and then another piece which was very much to do with the notion of whether prison's a place of protection, it can be seen as a place of protection, or a place of incarceration, and it's a very sort of ambiguous kind of role that prison has for many people. And the thought that once you're in the prison system and you're caught up in it, how are you ever extricated from that? Because my thought was about these children that that prison is their first home. How would that make you feel? How would that influence your thinking on life? And I was also interested in the work that the women did. So they had this oakum picking. So they were literally pulling fibres apart. So I had a couple of pieces of work that were very much to do with unravelling and unpicking. And then with the bits that were unpicked and unravelled, I then in effect made nests, because being in the prison made me think differently about what I would be doing, and that sort of sense of stepping into that cell the first day and how horrible that was, really horrible feeling. But by the end of the day, I'd sort of put some pieces around the room that I had brought with me, and suddenly the space became my space. And I thought, I can imagine if you were a woman going into prison with a child, that you would try and make that space your own. You would do whatever you could to make it homely and comfortable for your baby. So there were lots of sort of little bits of nest building going on, that the idea that you would have this place of nurture and care for your baby even in that prison environment. So yes.
And I really am quite interested in that word held that you mentioned, because obviously there is the quite like the maternal side of being held, yes, that brutality of being held within the prison. Was that something that you knew would come up in your work, or was that something that developed along the way while being in quite a harsh environment of being within the prison?
Well, there were several thoughts along those lines. First of all was the fact that I imagined people not being very open about their identity. So that idea of keeping a private, secret identity, and something that was kept private and secret. So that was another thing about the work, was that it would be this place of, and they talked about the prisons being, the original name of the prisons were House of Correction. So the idea that you would go in and you'd be transformed by your prison experience and come out differently. So that massively resonated with the notion of a pregnancy, and the fact that this sort of something goes on in this hidden secret place, which you don't necessarily know the outcome of, but you're hopeful it'll be a good one.
Of course.
So that was also part of it, and actually that sort of manifested itself more in drawings. I made a big, to be honest, I became, by the end of the first week, I felt quite overwhelmed by the sort of build-up of emotional response, both to the building and to contemporary news, stuff in the news about things about women in prison. So I actually made quite a sort of emotional response to that in a drawing, which was quite quite therapeutic, really. And that was more to do with that sense of the birthing, the pregnancy, the sort of hidden nurturing body functioning stuff.
And just picking up on what you're saying about, like, you had a lot of pent-up feelings from being within the prison. Can you just tell me a little bit more about your overall experience of being within the prison? Because obviously it's very different to working how you normally make your work, and your environment. So how did you cope? How did you feel it being within that prison?
Well, the first thing to say was that I think it was a brilliant experience, in the sense that it was so immersive, and it was a really, really deep dive into, it felt very intense, which was brilliant, but also quite difficult at times.
Yes.
And a lot of it was unexpected. A lot of it was very unexpected. Kind of knew that not to expect a beautiful place, but the intensely depressing nature of the cells, which are cold, dark and damp, and you try and imagine living in there with a small infant or pregnant, or I found that quite distressing, really, or well, probably too strong a word, but it was it was difficult to think about. And and then sort of contemporary events which remind you that it's still a very, very difficult experience and a dangerous experience. And
definitely the history of the prison. Obviously you was in what was the female women's wing, and you was working within a group of women within that environment. Did that help or hinder your experience, do you think, working within the singular cell? Because as you mentioned speaking to me earlier, that you found that when you had visitors, they found it difficult to almost cross that threshold. So how was that overall experience of working with other women within that setting?
Well, I think it was brilliant. I think it was actually a great relief to be able to go and especially the sea sanctuary room. I found that really, really beneficial, and having discussions with people, and so many interesting things came up. I mean, really unexpected things, but it was really useful to be able to think through ideas together. That was incredibly useful. And but also, I mean, the visitors who came as well, they having conversations with people about their thoughts and experiences was also really, really helpful and really informative, and quite surprising at times. So yeah.
No, it's great to hear. And obviously, as you said, you were discussing through ideas with other artists. Were you able to come together with ideas or collaborate in any kinds of ways with other artists?
Well, we did, as part of my feeling so overwrought by everything, at one point I wrote something down. I wrote some, well, I don't know if you'd call it a poem, but just some words down. And actually I shared those with I think with Fiona to begin with, and then she said, would we do this as a performance? So and actually, so that we did do it, and I found it well, it was very, I think it was very powerful actually. And actually at that point Joe's husband was in, George, and he was one of the voices in it, and having a male voice in it was actually also really interesting. So it was, and actually I think there was a couple of visitors who also read the words. So it was kind of we did it sort of amongst the artists, but then also with other people, and it was quite powerful, I think.
Brilliant. And it's so nice to hear that people came together over the course of the experience. And
there was lots of sort of just, you know, little collaborations, like sort of photographing together, and especially overnight there was some quite interesting stuff went on then. So
and as you mentioned, you were one of the ladies that spent your overnight stay within Seawing. So can you just tell us a little bit about that experience, because that's quite a unique one?
Unique, yes, exactly. Well, it wasn't as bad as I had expected.
That's good.
That's because I'd been lent a really rather gorgeous sleeping bag, so I was very comfortable.
Oh yes, nice and cozy.
And basically I have a capacity to be able to sleep anywhere, so I didn't have a problem sleeping. But it was good to be in there in the dark. It was good to be in there at night. In terms of, well, obviously everything looked different, and so yes, some interesting photographs taken during the night, and and it was very because most of the time I think we had our cell doors open a lot of the time during the day, so actually at night to then close the door and just be in that space, it was quite an experience. And
I know you had some of your work sort of around you within the cell when you had the overnight. Did it make you view your work any differently being there at night time?
Absolutely. Yes. And it's very comforting.
Good.
Yes, I mean, I think that's the funny thing, isn't it, that well, I don't know if this is true, everybody, but I think there's such an instinct to make a place your own, or make a place feel inhabited, and I don't know if it's intensely, whether it's a more female thing, I don't know, but definitely that sense of having something familiar and comforting. That, because actually that came up quite a lot in what I was, the things that I was trying to make, because I sort of imagined these mothers who had absolutely, well, little or nothing, and trying to comfort and entertain and, you know, be motherly in that sort of context. So I actually made some tiny little bits out of literally rubbish, you know, little offcuts of threads, and just found bits of paper and so on. And and it was a very sort of playful thing, the way that you do it when you're a kid, and you basically make believe of, you know, this is your doll, or this is your you know, you can imagine just the make believe things. Yeah.
And I think as well, with yourself working in like using textiles and the color choices that you had, because when I'd seen videos and images of your work, it felt very warm, which is
that's interesting
to
that's
your environment.
So
the idea of nesting and nesting, being held,
warm bodies.
Yes, all these like
trying to keep bodies warm. Yeah.
Sort of warm
because I mean we were there sort of I suppose like the tail end of the summer really, so it's probably as warm in there as it ever gets, because there's no heating in there, and you think no gosh, that would be it would be very, very hard to be in there in the winter.
Definitely, it'd be very, very cold
with little kids or
yeah. But you definitely put your mark on your cell, I must say, and in the most positive sense.
Oh, I tell you what's interesting though, because that was obviously when you go into the cell, and there are markers and marks that have been there from previous occupants. And that was quite an interesting sensation, because there was a sort of sense of almost like respecting or honouring these things that people had done. I had quite a sort of dramatic piece of, well, to me it looked like a sort of military emblem that was up on the wall. And to begin with, I put something on the wall, but I put it beside that. And then I thought, actually, I really don't like this. I don't want to live with this. So I then covered it up, but it was quite a sort of gesture. It felt a strange thing to do, to do that. And then also there was a couple of very tiny, beautiful little drawings on the wall.
Oh, okay.
And that was really intriguing. They were like little logos that had been very carefully drawn, and I was quite intrigued by those as well. So people do make their mark, don't they? They do, yes.
Oh, definitely. And the fact that it's time, isn't it? Someone has spent time in there, and you had 16 days in there, which is your period of time. And I think just, for yourself, being in that singular cell, so cells held one person that you was in, and make it, really focusing, making a certain work on a particular theme, which, as you said, it struggled with initially, but by the end of it, you'd spilled out into the main hall of the side of your cell, and sort of gone for it. It was When did you feel comfortable breaking out of your cell, as it were?
Yes. Well, that is interesting, because it had been my original intention. I knew that I needed those things to be hung out there, because that was an initial thing. But actually having the sort of, that I've just been reading my diaries, and actually there were a couple of days where I didn't manage to get things hung out there for one reason or another. And it actually became a point of like quite a trial to sort of get through that, the other way through the door, out of the door and into the space. But once it was in the space, then that felt felt right to have got out of there. Yes.
Well, now that you have excuse the pun, but broken free from your cell, where is this something that your work will continue to go in, looking at these themes, or grow any more in this project?
Well, I've actually got an exhibition on at the moment, and it's called Who Is My Mother? Brilliant. And I didn't intend to use pieces from the prison residency, but they seem so appropriate because of the notion that the state might be your mother, I think has come up, and it's come up in my mind, that we have multiple mothers, and for some people it is the state. So I think that's really intriguing. And also the big message about the prison system is that it's better not to have people in the position where they are going to go into prison. So how do you make sure that doesn't happen? And I suppose quite a strong feeling that I would like to do something that would be supportive of people in a creative way, that would just something a bit positive for people that perhaps are a little bit more vulnerable. Yeah,
definitely. Well, it sounds like there's lots of positive that's come out of your project, and it just sounds like it could only grow bigger and bigger. So I really do hope to see lots more work of that kind in the not so far future, hopefully.
Well, it's been an extraordinary experience, and I really do thank you for the opportunity, because it's been very, very intensely brilliant. Difficult but brilliant.
Well, you're welcome. But we'll wrap up there and just say again, thank you so much for giving your time today, because it's been really lovely just having a bit more of an overview of your work and how you got on. So thank you so much, and we'll hopefully see you soon.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.